Hello, welcome to the daily drawing. Today we're going to be drawing a spider monkey, I think is what it's called. I'm going to be drawing this on my iPad because I don't have my pencils and stuff handy. Alright, so the first thing we're going to start with is we're going to start with the head shape. That head shape is just going to be somewhat of a kind of a circly, ovally shape. And we want to put it kind of closer to the top corner of your paper so that you have space for the body. So make sure that you're leaving some gaps over here. Alright, now what you're going to do is I would suggest actually drawing kind of like a ribcage area before you draw the body. So starting on the side of the head here, what we're going to do is we're going to do a parenthesis. Oops, if I get my pencil work, there it goes. Kind of like a little parenthesis shape that's going to curve all the way down to the bottom of the head like this. That's going to get us the curve of the kind of like rib cage stuff that goes right here in this particular area. Alright, so next what we're going to do, sorry my dog's just opened the door. So the next what you're going to do is we're going to do the curve of the back. This is the spine. We're going to start right here where we started this part right here. And then we're just going to do one really big frown that goes all the way down here. If you're wondering how long to make that, if you measure using your fingers, like the width of the head like this, so we can fit like 1, 2 heads before we should get down to that bottom part. So if I measure this, 1, 2, the bottom part should be somewhere right around here is a good goal for it. So we're going to curve it back, just doing an exaggerated frown. And notice that this does go up a little bit, so make sure that the back of the body does in fact go up a little bit before you start curving down. And you want to make sure that that's about 2 heads downwards. If you make it a little bit longer than 2 heads, all you have to do is just shorten it until you're satisfied with it. And of course, you can always just take an eraser and erase any mistakes that you might have made, and that's totally fine. Alright, so now that we have the curve of the back and we have kind of the rib cage and the head thing, we're going to go ahead and do just a basic body shape here. So if you'll notice that the bottom of the body just kind of curves up and then it continues until it gets over here to the other side. So what I would suggest doing is just drop this down and just a very light curve so that we kind of connect it. So it's going to look like a really weird kind of like vulture-y thing. Just trust it. This will just help us so that we don't make the legs too far down or too far up, because the legs should be able to cover most of this area, which is why we draw it lightly. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to save the face for last, because the face is going to be the cute fun part. We're going to go ahead and do the legs and arms. If you'll notice, this leg right here, this is actually kind of like the front of the shoulder, and then it goes down for the leg itself, and this makes kind of like a greater than or less than sign that's a little bit curvy. So what we're going to do is we're going to start below the center of the head. We're just going to start off with doing a slightly curved line going in towards the body. Once you reach the bottom of that rib cage that we drew, we're going to change direction and then start heading down. And that'll be the, this is kind of like the across from the elbow area, and this will go down to the wrist. Now, if you are wanting to be precise and you want to measure it, you can always measure the size of the head. How many heads down from the rib cage is the hand? And for my measurements, it measures about 1. So I want to make sure that my arm is at least the length of how high the head is, such as this right here. So now that I have that length done, I'm just going to cap it off with a smile. I'll show you how to draw fingers in just a moment. And then if I look at this, it goes up and a kind of a diagonal line. It stays pretty parallel to what this was right here until it gets across from that elbow area, and then it's going to curve upwards in this direction where we can see that shadow of where the line would be. So we're just going to mimic this, do a parallel line. It goes a little bit wider at the elbow, and then we're just going to curve it up until it gets close to the rib cage. You don't have to touch it if your rib cage was a little bit smaller, but you're just going to change directions right here across from the elbow. You want to change it to where it's not going in the same angle. You want it to be like a really stretched out greater than or less than sign. Alright, next what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and draw the fingers on this. I consider a general rule of thumb is that if you go ahead and draw whatever's in front, it helps you draw the things behind you as well. So what I would suggest doing is use the stick method to draw the fingers. So here we can see that we have a shorter finger here, and then we have 3 longer fingers, and then a shorter finger over here. So 5 fingers all together. What I would suggest doing is start with the 2 smaller fingers on the outside. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw from the outside of the hand, I'm just going to draw a small diagonal line here, and then the same thing here, which luckily the fingers aren't too bent, so we're not having to worry about drawing like the joints and stuff. Over here we will, but right here it's fairly straight. And then if I see here, I can see that this is the longest finger, and then I have 2 slightly shorter fingers. So I'm just going to start in the middle. I'm going to go down however long I want that longest finger to be. And then just somewhere in between, I'm just going to draw 2 other fingers that are going down a little bit longer than the 2 that are on the sides, but not as long as this one. Alright, now that I have my somewhat creepy bone fingers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to draw parallel lines next to them. Notice that they are very thin. They're kind of bony. If you want to draw little knobs where the knuckles are, you can kind of see where there's slight curves going up. You can. I'm going to keep mine fairly smooth though, but that's up to you if you want to add that detail. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to cap it off with a parenthesis, and then bring it back in towards the hand until I touch that little nub that I drew before, and I'm just going to bring it back out. Now you can either outline it like this, or if you want to, what I would suggest doing is kind of like get close to it, go around it like this so that you're still leaving the bone on the inside, and then you can always just take an eraser and go back and erase the interior so that you don't see the bone. Depending on where you put it, you may or may not have to do that, so it's kind of up to you. So on some of these, I can just draw right on the line that I drew. On others, I might have to draw around it. It just kind of depends on how you spaced it out. So if you look at it and you're like, ew, that looks kind of weird, it probably is weird, and you might want to fix it. It's kind of up to you if you want to or not, though. All right, so now that I've drawn my outlines around it, that's pretty much all I need to do for the actual paw itself. Because it's very flat and it's very splayed out, so you don't really see the inside pads or anything. There is a little bit of like claws or nails of some sorts that if you want to add that detail, feel free to. Alright, so now this just curves back up. You don't have to keep this curve right here. There is a little bit of fluff that covers the top of the hand, so if you want to change that curve into fluff, just do that little Z line that we've learned. All the Z line is just wiggling back and forth with kind of like W and V shapes, except you're just adding a little bit of a curve to it, so it's not perfectly straight. All right, so on the hand, I'm just adding that little bit of a V, or a little bit of a Z line there, and then I'm also going to add a little bit of a Z line on the back of the arm. Not too long, because it does have fluffy arms, but they're not like super, super fluffy. All right, so there's just a little bit of texture there, and you can also add it on the front part, or you can always wait and do this later. It's up to you. Alright, so now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and do this back leg first. I'm going to save this other leg for after I finish the back 2 feet. Alright, so if you look here, it starts at the back of the body, and then it's just making one very big elaborate frown, and then it goes down right next to the elbow and down to the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start back here, really close to the back of the body, and if you are at this point and you feel like the body needs to be a little bit bigger, feel free to stretch the body out a little bit. So that's kind of up to you if you want to judge. Just keep in mind that it's always okay to fix things as you go. You never have to stick with what you drew before. You can always edit it and change it. So for me, I feel like it's a little bit too close to the elbow, so I scooted it back. I might have to make my head bigger later. We'll just have to see on that. So, all right, so I'm going to start close to the edge of the body without touching it. I'm just going to go up in a frown, really exaggerated. And then once I get to the point where I think I'm ready to go down, which it should be pretty close across from where you stopped the other arm, if not a little bit above or below. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to frown it out. I'm going to allow it to kind of almost touch that elbow. Go down just a little bit past that body line that we drew. Once we get a little bit past that body line we drew, we're going to go ahead and stop. And then what I would suggest doing is go ahead and draw this line right here. This is just indicating where the leg is bent up, because this is like the hips, that's the knee, this is the ankle, and that's the foot. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a slight curve, a slight parenthesis going up about halfway into the leg. I don't want it to go all the way up, because otherwise that kind of caps off the muscles. And then I'm just going to round down the bottom of the thigh like this. All right, so the reason we're leaving this open is because that's where we're going to put our foot. If we look at the shape of this foot, it's making kind of like a greater than or less than sign that is facing downwards. So it's going to go flat and then go straight down. Or if you want to look at it kind of like an upside down V, that would also work. So what I'm going to do to get that look is I'm going to start on the bottom of the foot. I'm going to go out kind of flat first. And then after I get past the leg a little bit, then I'm going to change directions to where it goes down. Now, I don't want it to get too close to this foot, or too close to this hand. You want to stop it about where the wrist is. So somewhere in this area is where you want to stop the toe. You don't want to go too far down, otherwise it'll kind of run into the other hand, and you don't want it to get too close. All right, so what I would suggest doing on this one, we're going to do a slightly different technique, is we're going to actually go ahead and draw this toe going up. So just draw a slight smile at the bottom, and then you're just going to follow it with a parallel line. And once again, if you want to draw like the little knobs that are on the knuckles, feel free to draw those if you want to do a little bit more of a detailed drawing. And then you're just going to bring it back in. You want to go a little bit past the actual leg line there, just because it does go into the, or it goes underneath the leg there. All right, so now that we have our first toe, we can see that the second toe looks like it's growing out of this toe, and then it comes down to a little bit past the previous one that we just drew. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start it right there on that same point that I ended. I'm going to go a little bit bigger than what I did before. Go down, and I'm just going to curve this back up. You can make it touch. It's okay to leave a little bit of a gap there. There is a tiny gap between it and the picture here, so if you want to leave a gap, you can. But I'm going to go ahead and allow mine to touch, just because otherwise I might run out of room. And then after you finish with that claw or toe, you can just do another smile here. Bring it back up. And then this time you can allow it to touch the other one's knuckle at this point. And then I can see one more, and it's kind of hidden behind the leg. If yours doesn't quite reach all the way to the leg, that's totally fine. It's okay to have it a little bit shorter or bigger. It can be even hidden behind the leg completely if you want to. All right, so now that I have my curves for my toes, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of fluff texture to some parts of this body, just give a little bit more texture so it's not so smooth. And there is a little bit of fluff overlapping the foot here, so I'm going to allow that fluff to overlap. So now that I have my 2 feet here, I'm going to go ahead and do this foot right here because it is overlapping this one, and that'll make it easier if I go ahead and do that. So for this foot, the toes are all kind of touching and scrunched up together. The easiest way to draw this foot, in my opinion, would be to draw just a big parenthesis here. It's going to start, looks like across from this foot. So if I go across from this foot to this part, it should be able to curve down and then touch the, I guess it's the thumb, maybe? It should be able to touch whatever this finger is down here on this monkey. So it's just going to make a big curve like this. And then what you do in order to draw those fingers, because they're all close together, is you're just going to draw a smile at the bottom, and then you're just going to draw another curve going up. And you just draw that for however many fingers that you can fit in that particular area. I can fit 3 fingers, you might be able to fit 4. All right, and then I see that the fur covering the top of the foot is covering where the tip of that ankle is. So I'm just going to draw a little wiggly line to cover up the tip of the ankle. All right, last arm. Good, there's so many fingers on this guy. All right, so for the last arm part, we can see that it's just curving. Here's the rib cage area. It curves down from the rib cage all the way until it almost touches this weird foot we just drew there. So all we're going to do is we're going to start here. We're just going to do a slight parenthesis, and then just allow it to fall down straight until it gets pretty close to touching, but without actually touching this other foot. And then all we have to do really is we're going to draw just kind of like a slight frown, like this, until you get however far out you want to go for this particular hand here. All right, afterwards, we're going to leave this part in here just open for now. We can come back and add some textures. We're going to focus on the fingers. All right, so here we can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers visible. This finger right here is touching the other foot that we just drew, and it's just making a small curve going up, and we can see a little triangle space here that we want to draw. Sometimes it's helpful to look at the negative spaces in between things. All right, so I'm just going to start on the tip of this other finger, draw a little smile, then I'm going to go up. Don't quite touch the top of the hand, of course, and then afterwards I'm just going to curve it down in a slight kind of like parenthesis. After we have that part drawn, then I'm just going to curve that up like this, and then go until you get about across from here, or until before you touch the top of the hand. And then now I can see 1, 2, I guess I don't see 3, I only see like 1, 2, 3, I don't see 4. So then I'm going to go ahead and start on, not even with it, otherwise it'd be the same length. I'm going to go a little bit above it right here. I'm going to do a slight smile, and then I'm going to bring it back up like this. And then, of course, to finish up this last one, I'm just going to do a little smile to connect this other one. Now, if you have space and you feel like that made that finger too big, you can add like another line for another finger, and that's totally fine. You don't have to match the picture exactly. All right, so to finish this up, I'm just going to add a little bit of fur on the top of the hand and on the back of the hand here. And then there is a little bit of a triangle here where we can see a space between it. So what I'm going to do to help that triangle is I'm just going to add a texture here, kind of like in front of the previous arm that we drew, in order to make it to where like this looks like the negative space. And that also kind of helps define the edge of my elbow. So now that we have the most complicated part done, because the toes are, oh my gosh, we can go ahead and move on to the face. If I'm looking at it, my face is, it's okay in the size. If you want to draw it bigger, if you've drawn it too small, you can. That's kind of up to you. But first things first, before you move on, make sure the head is the size that you would like it to be. Once again, if it's a younger one, you want the head to be a little bit bigger. If it's an older one, you want to make it a little bit smaller. So that's kind of up to you what size you would like. And also, while we're at this point, since we're done with the legs, you can go ahead and draw that bottom body line that we drew initially for us to help measure the legs and stuff. And you can also erase the rib cage. Do not erase this line right here, because that's indicating the shoulder line, and we want to keep that, especially if you're planning on like shading or coloring or whatever. All right, so now that I have my head shape, what I would suggest doing is draw a line of symmetry, and this monkey's head is slightly tilted to the side, so I'm going to draw a slightly tilted line very lightly like this, going through the center. And then my eye line is going to be in the center of the head, so it should line up with about the back of the spine. It may or may not, depending on where you drew it. But you're just going to divide the head in halves like a crosshairs. And then afterwards, what I would suggest doing is go ahead and draw the muzzle first, and then draw, if you'll notice there's a heart shape around its face. So what I would suggest doing is draw a rounded muzzle close, and it should be almost touching, if not then actually touching the bottom of the head here, because that's going to be where the chin's going to go. And then after you have a rounded muzzle area, then you can start on the side of the muzzle right about here, and then you're just going to go up in a heart shape. It should almost touch the edge of the head. And then you should notice that the indentation of the heart is right there in between the eyes. That'll line up on that line of symmetry. So that's where you're going to have that indent, is on that line of symmetry. Then we're going to go ahead and continue it until it gets back to the other side. So that's going to be my heart shape that goes around the face. And you can exaggerate that if you would like. All right, so now I see that my nose is actually just 2 diagonal lines on the side of this nostril, or on the side of the muzzle. So I'm just going to draw 2 really small diagonal lines. And they're almost kind of lining up with that heart shape, if you want to use that as the thing to help you out. And then for the mouth, it's a little hard to see on this picture, but it kind of starts on one side of the muzzle. It makes a slight curve up and then goes to the other side. So for the mouth, I'm going to start here. I'm going to do a slight smile. Then I'm going to switch it. I'm going to add a wonk to make it a slight frown, and then smile it again. That way we have, it's almost kind of like one of those faces like this, except we want to make it to where it's slightly bent in the front, but not quite that exaggerated. And that can help you draw that face feature. All right, and then of course you want to make sure that you preserve the bottom of the chin. So you want to keep a nice smile at the bottom of the chin, like this. Now, if you want to, you can take your eraser. Oops, that one was a little too big. You can take your eraser and erase parts of this muzzle. We don't need the top of the muzzle. I would suggest keep the sides of the muzzle because that is very helpful, especially if you're planning on like coloring or something. But you don't have to keep the top of the muzzle after you've drawn the rest of the like the chin and that stuff, because it's just for helping measuring. All right, so this looks like it's its eyes, and that's funny and weird. Anyway, all right, so for the eyes themselves, if you look at the nostrils and go straight up, you'll notice that that's lining up with the corner of their eyes. So if you go straight up from the nostril, that's where we're going to start the eye, and then it's going to line up on that eye line. So what I'm going to do is, they have very, very round eyes, so I'm going to start with a exaggerated frown, like this, and then I'm going to do an exaggerated smile on the bottom, like this. That way we have a nice eye shape. So they're almost like circles, but they're a little bit more human shaped, to where they look kind of like almonds of sorts. So once again, you're going to go up from the center of the nose. You're going to go to the line, and then you're just going to do a slight frown and then a slight smile. And that'll be kind of your eye shapes. And of course, if you want to go for more of a cartoony aesthetic, you can make it more round. You can make it more pointy. You can give it like a really cool expression. But as always, I'm just going to do a little highlight and then fill in the rest. That way it gives it a little bit more life. All right, so we're almost done here. We have to do the ears next. That's just going to be kind of like a triangle shape sticking out from the side. But notice it's not a perfect triangle. It's a little bit wonky. So to do this, if you'll notice, it's across from the top of that heart shape on their head is where we're going to start it. So if I go across from this heart shape to the edge of the head, I'm going to just do start with a slight frown and then do a slight smile like this, so that I get a little bit of a wonky line. And then in order to finish it up, I'm just going to do a smile to connect it back down like this. So it's almost like they have a leaf sticking out the side of their head. And then if you want to, they do have a nice texture on their ears. So if you want to add like a little bit of a fluff texture, you can. And of course, we're going to do the same thing on this other side. So across from that little heart thing, and then we're just going to do slight wiggle line and then a little bit of a smile line until it comes back down. And this is probably definitely going to overlap the body, so feel free to erase the body after you finish that. Then of course add a little bit of texture. Now on the face itself, it does have some texture as well, so if you want to add a little bit of a fluff texture to the edge of the head, that can have a little bit of more texture added to it. You can also add some of this to the top of the heart shape, because they do have a little bit of that texture added as well. Alright, so we're done with the initial drawing part. If you have any extra lines that you don't want and you want to erase them, feel free to go ahead and get rid of those extra lines now. We don't need like the lines of symmetry anymore, and we don't need like all these extra scribbly lines that I might have, or like the lines that separate the head and ear. You can go ahead and erase those and then replace them with texture lines if you want, or you can keep them. It's up to you if you want to leave it like a smooth like monkey head or whatever. Alright, so from here, what I would suggest doing, we don't see the tail because it's under the branch, so I would actually suggest go ahead and draw the branch itself like this. And if you have space, or if you just want to exaggerate it, you can draw the tail coming around it. Now this particular monkey's tail is behind the tree, so if I were to visualize it and the tail's going behind the tree, it could potentially curve up like this, and then we could have like a big fluffy monkey tail, like the tip of it, because it would naturally just kind of flow away from the body. So if you want to add a tail somewhere in there, or if you want to draw the tail going in front of the tree, you can. That'll just be coming out from the base of the spine, and then that can curve up. And they do have really long tails, by the way, so you can feel free to exaggerate that. So if you want to add the tail, then definitely feel free to, and that could add a little bit more to your monkey drawing. All right, so from this point, all you have to do is just do a little bit of cleanup, and then if you want to add some textures and stuff, definitely feel free to. Right now, the monkey looks extremely smooth, so he looks a little bit on the weird side. So I'm going to add some more textures. Feel free to if you would like. If you don't want to, you don't have to, of course. Now, some parts, the fur is really short, so instead of doing a bunch of Z lines, I'm actually going to do some hash lines like this, and just making sure that I'm drawing them in the direction that the fur is growing. So I'm essentially just kind of tapping my pencil onto the paper to try to give a little bit more texture, and really paying attention to where the direction is that you want to go for the texture, and kind of like how much you want to add. And as usual, I usually add more texture in the areas that do have some shading to it. And yeah, all right, so all I'm going to do to really finish up is I'm going to add a little bit of shading to it. So I'm just going to add some little diagonal lines to shade. Of course, if you don't want to, you don't have to shade. I mean, I am going to draw like a little indication for where the arms are separate colors, because I do think that the different coloration on the monkey looks pretty cool. I might have drawn his eyes a little bit too big, but that's okay. It makes it look more of a cartoony aesthetic, and I think that looks cute. All right, so I'm just going to do a little bit of shading where these, especially with the color difference areas. And I really like how like their muzzles are like mostly black. I think that looks adorable. It has a really nice contrast for them as well. So if you choose to color this, definitely feel free to change up the color scheme. I really like the colors that they do have. I love this kind of like soft, kind of grayish brown with the like really bright neon yellow. It looks really, really cool. But if you wanted to do like a purple monkey or like monkey with polka dots or something, that's totally acceptable, and I think that would be really fun. Whenever you get down to these feet, if you are choosing to shade it, really focusing on making the feet look separate from each other, because there is so much overlap going on here. If you really add some different shading to the feet that are behind the others, that can really push the feet that are in front further to the front, so that makes it more obvious that those feet are actually separate from each other. So just really be mindful of where you're adding your shading. And of course, if you have a reference like I do, sticking to the reference is probably a really, really good idea. That way it can really help you with your shading and stuff. All right, so I think that looks like a pretty cute monkey. So I think I'm going to call that one done. So I hope you guys had some fun and that you learned how to draw some monkeys. All right, have a good day. Bye.